Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Well, Kate,
Here we are again.
that's right.
Uh-huh.
And it's unbelievable because this is show number 55.
Oh, it's even more unbelievable. We're almost at the end of September.
Yeah,
Another
yeah.
3 months to Christmas. I mean, this is crazy fast stuff going past.
Yeah, I think time does pass at different speeds. It certainly does things differently over the, over the vast reaches of space.
Mm-hmm.
But that notwithstanding, what do we have to do first? We need to slate.
Yes, slating. Slating's good.
Yes, today is September 26th. 2017, and we are Shattered Reality Podcast, and we have an extra special show for you today. The first part of our show is going to be with a wonderful woman who I'm going to introduce in a minute. This woman is a doctor and a UFO specialist, and she is really an impressive person. Our second guest is in our listeners' corner at the very end of the show, where people who are listeners get an opportunity to tell their stories. And I'm going to tell you who that is right away before I get into introducing our main guest. That's going to be Anthony Santuoso, who is a well-known painter in the magical realism school and a long-term teacher at the Fashion Institute of Technology in painting, drawing, and two-dimensional design. So he's going to be on at the end of the show. But right now, we are really, really proud to present the author of UFOs Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up. Let's all welcome Dr. Irena Scott. Dr. Irena Scott. Okay, Dr. Scott.
Welcome to the show.
Yes.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
I guess the first question that we almost always ask people is, how did you get interested in this? What was the draw into ufology for you?
Well, I'm not a ufologist exactly. It's
right.
But
Nobody makes a living at this.
no, I've been in something else. But I was always interested in astronomy ever since I remember as a small child. And I went to school in astronomy and went to Ohio State University and graduated. But I couldn't get a job in astronomy because I was a female.
Mm.
All the places I applied to wouldn't give me an application because it was male only.
Wow.
And so I had to go into something else. And so they were mapping the moon and other planets. And they took females for that kind of work, for mapping and cartography. And so I applied for that and got into it. But I got a high security clearances, and I transferred to the Defense Intelligence Agency. But I wound up doing satellite photography on Earth instead of other worlds like I wanted to.
Yeah.
And at that time, I got married and moved away, and I had an offer as a fellowship to go into physiology and get a PhD. So that's what I did. And I was a professor and worked in a number of institutions in research, such as Cornell and Ohio State and different places.
That's quite a jump from astronomy into physiology.
Yeah, and were you an actual veterinarian, or did I misunderstand that somewhere in your bio?
I graduated from the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine, but I got a PhD instead of a vet degree.
I see.
That wasn't easy back then either, to get into vet school for a woman either.
No.
Now, if you didn't want to be a secretary, gym teacher, or nurse, you were sort of, you know, yeah. Anyway, so, it's funny. People, I was very interested in UFOs too, and people would always ask me, well, how did you get into UFOs? And like you, I never really had an epiphany, like a real solid answer. Like, one day I saw one, and then from there on in, I was interested. And I sense that with you too, like it was something that was always on the back burner from childhood up.
Right.
And you finally really looked into it.
Finally. It took quite a while.
Yeah. Well, it does. I mean, it's sort of a thankless, payless type of a hobby interest, really, more than anything.
I just want to mention how interesting your book is. For not only, it's just there's a compendium of knowledge there about the UFO subject, but it's from a real insider perspective. And even the cases, many of the cases that people who have read other ufology books have read about, such as Roswell and the Flatwoods Monster and the chase over from Ohio into Pennsylvania with the police officers, that the police officers all kind of had difficult lives after that. The detail and the insider information that you added to those accounts was truly amazing.
Well, that's one reason I wrote the book, is I had actually worked on the inside of some of the places that were exploring UFOs, such as I had been stationed off and on at Wright Patterson. I knew somebody, and they're Wright Patterson Air Force Base, and they're heavily involved in UFOs. They were housed Blue Book in those organizations. And I'd also worked at Battelle Memorial Institute, and they had done a study of UFOs. And I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they were working on UFOs, although I never worked directly on UFOs, but I was there and kind of knew the ins and outs and gossip and different things like that.
I think everybody, or not maybe everybody, but the majority of the listeners have some clue as to what went on at Wright Patterson. I mean, they obviously probably, if they haven't read your book, would have the kind of knowledge that you're exploring with Wright Patterson. But I think that people have heard of Wright Field becoming Wright Patterson Field, and how probably the debris from Roswell was transported there. But could you give us a little bit more information about what Battelle Institute is exactly? Because I believe that many of our listeners have never heard of it.
It's I think it's the world's largest, independent research organization or nonprofit research organization. It's right across the street from Ohio State University and well connected with them. And it's done a whole lot in innovation. It was the developers of the Xerox and of the CD, and it was heavily involved in the Manhattan Project developing the atomic bomb, and it's been real active in a lot of things that in our everyday world.
Interesting, especially about the part about the Xerox stuff. Because if memory serves me correctly, and I could be wrong about this, that the UVA Division of Perceptual Studies down in Virginia, University of Virginia, Department of Perceptual Studies, I believe was largely funded by the man who was behind Xerox. Are you aware of that?
No, I wasn't. That's interesting.
Because they do a lot of work on psychokinesis, people that I kind of know, and also they do a bunch of work on past lives with Dr. Ian Stevenson and now today with Dr. Jim Tucker. But they got a huge grant, to my knowledge, from the gentleman whose first name was like Clarence or something of that nature, who was the Xerox, scientist. I don't know. But that's what I think. But I don't want to go too far afield with that.
I
But
would be real interested in more information. Maybe you can send to me later.
I absolutely will send you more information on that. I absolutely will. I was particularly interested in part of the things that you were talking about when you worked for the DIA, where there was information coming into you, not you particularly, but to your office, so to speak, about objects that there were photographs of that everybody concluded were actual physical objects, and the DIA and the CIA were kind of disagreeing, and the CIA was talking about it being an optical illusion, and everybody knew it wasn't. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I was working in a section called the Air Order of Battle. This was a section where we looked at a certain territory in the world, and we were supposed to identify any type of aircraft in that area. It was really highly classified work with security clearances above top secret. And so we went about our normal work of identifying aircraft, and we generally knew what aircraft we were looking at. We were supposed to look at different types and know what target them, which meant say where they were, and that sort of thing. And that would be, if UFOs were craft, you'd think that would be a place where the government would be studying the photography to look for crafts,
yes,
like UFOs. But in my work and in my section of work, there was nothing said about UFOs. We were supposed to identify everything as an airplane or whatever. And so my supervisors saw what they thought was a UFO, and I thought so too. They reported it to their higher-ups, and we were supposed to be the experts. I mean, we were the experts on this territory of the world. We were supposed to be the top experts, and our identifications were supposed to be correct. So my supervisors reported this as a UFO. And I saw the pictures and everything, and it was on at least 2 missions, not in exactly the same place, but it didn't look normal to me at all. And I could see it in stereoscopically and things. And so anyway, the superiors got back to my supervisors and said, no, it wasn't. It was a flaw in the film, which made no sense to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't a flaw in the film. For one thing, it was on 2 films, and you could see them and look at them and see, reduce or enlarge the image of one or the other and see them in stereo. See them stereoscopically was how definite it was. And so the supervisors went to some other experts that were told that could tell whether something was a flaw in the film or not. And the people said, no, the specialist said, no, this is not a flaw in the film. It's real. But the supervisors kept right on saying it's a flaw in the film, which was pretty insulting because we were supposed to be.
Indeed.
And they treated us just like we were nobodies.
So the CIA and the DIA disagreed, you being with the DIA. Can you in some way describe for us what the object looked like on the film?
Well, I don't know if it was a CIA. I mean, I was working for the DIA, and I think our reports went to the CIA, but it wasn't the whole DIA. It was just our section of Air Order Battle in the DIA. What it looked like was it looked basically kind of like the saucer shape. It was round with a real big dome and no features aside from that.
Okay.
I mean,
So,
it looked,
yeah, go ahead.
its surface looked like, you know, an airplane or a craft or something.
Is it that typical brushed aluminum look that so widely mentioned?
I think in general it was. I
Uh-huh.
don't remember exactly, but I remember it looked like a craft anyway.
And I think in your book, you kind of describe it as that, but that the dome was rather higher than the average UFO sighting was in general in those days.
It looked like it, but I wasn't sure because I had used photography from two different missions and uh, got them so it was the same size and I could look at them in stereo. But that was kind of a different way of looking at it from usual. But
Uh-huh.
so I wasn't real sure.
Was there any idea how fast it was going?
It was on two missions and it had shifted. It was over water and you could tell it wasn't in the water. It had shifted its position a little bit. Each mission was 90 minutes and we just saw it on two missions. But for 90 minutes, it was in the same general area.
Why don't we take a stop right now and let Irena mention the name of her book again and all of that, because we like to make sure that our listeners hear that a couple of three times, you know?
Okay, the name is UFOs Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up. And you can order it from Amazon.com, and it's pretty easy to find on the internet. Just put Irena Scott, and it should pop up.
Okay. Okay. So, another thing that interested me for particularly personal reasons, because I am an experiencer, was the teenage boys in two different locations during around the same time who saw craft and then saw beings come out of those craft, and then they reported this. They were teenagers, and then the people from the government purportedly called them up or contacted them and asked them about their dreams later on and whether they were out of body, whether they went out of body.
This was two different sightings. The one where the government called people up were the pilots of a helicopter
Oh, okay.
called the Coin helicopter.
Okay. I guess I conflated the two different parts there. Sorry about that.
But that happened. I don't know if you know anything about the Coin helicopter.
Do you, Kate?
Hear that?
No, I don't actually. But
Oh, no, that's fine.
well, no. What kind of helicopter are they? There's something special about them.
They were on a trip from I think Columbus to Mansfield, Ohio, and they saw a light and didn't pay attention to it, and then it got nearer and nearer, and finally it was over them, and their cockpit turned green, and I think there were some other effects, and then the object went away, but for some reason their helicopter had risen like several thousand feet, and when they tried to get control of it again, they almost crashed into the ground, and there were other people that witnessed that, and so it was a pretty well-known sighting. And Coyne was the pilot, and later on the government had called him several times and asked about his dreams.
Well, that sort of gets into your final conclusion, too, that rather than continue to study along the nuts and bolts line, we have to get more into like a quantum mechanics, consciousness type of a line.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot more. I mean, if you go, the idea of spaceships or something from space or other planets is complicated enough, but I think you the UFO phenomenon might be a lot more complicated than that.
Yes.
It seems to be, you know, and everyone says, "Oh, it's a government cover-up," and I think a lot of information is perhaps shielded by the government. But, you know, it's hard enough. I just don't think the government is capable of covering up the entire story. I think the various information is so dispersed throughout the government, and there's so little desire to share it that I just can't believe in a government cover-up. Not that they wouldn't do it, but I just don't think they're capable of it to any great extent.
I have to go back here, Kate, to our former guest, Dr. John B. Alexander, and say that the government isn't one thing, as you know. I mean, it may not be that like the vice president knows all the secrets and is keeping them at the Naval Observatory from us, but that there are lots of pockets of the government which are black ops projects that never see the light of day, and many of which are transferred over into the private sector, into places like, you know, Bigelow Aerospace, or who is the guy who said, Ben Rich, we can bring them, you know, the Ben Rich fellow. I
Skunk Works.
Skunk Works, exactly. So, you know, where I don't believe the government, like a person at the that's the head of the Department of Agriculture or something, has probably no idea about any kind of government cover-up about UFOs, would be my guess. You know what I'm saying, Kate?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. That's the point. But I think that's the point Dr. Scott is making, too, that there has to be a whole different approach to it.
Yes.
But you also sort of hint at the fact that even though another approach would be called for, you don't think that possibly we're not capable of it at this particular point in time. Is that so, or did I misunderstand?
Well, it was my impression after working for the government that the government isn't in unison. And it was my impression that your clearances are top secret. And then there's code word clearances above those. And those are compartmentalized so that one code word may be for something and another code word may be for something else. And you don't find out what, maybe somebody way at the top finds out what all the code words are, but the people that are working under the clearances don't. So if there's some place in the government that knows about UFOs, which I'm sure there is, they would be in a compartmentalized place with a certain code word. And it wouldn't be a general government thing, it would just be a few people.
Yeah, it just, the thing that always struck me is that when there was a sighting, it seems that past Roswell, that there's been some other crashes, that out of nowhere, you suddenly get this government force there within hours. I mean, maybe an hour, right?
Right. Like, like Hicksburg.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mean, these people come in there. I mean, but that means you have to have a whole division ready to go at a second's notice that may not be utilized for a year or two or three. So the whole thing is rather bizarre, I think. I don't know.
It sure is bizarre.
Well, you know, like you, Dr. Scott, I read all the stories. Every time someone says Roswell, I almost feel like there should be a, you know, like a musical background, like the Holy Grail. But I've never came to any conclusion. Never, ever.
Well, I've got to come to the conclusion that it's not all one thing. And even when, like in your book, Dr. Irena Scott, there is the fact that two people, such as you have mentioned, two sisters who saw two different things. They both saw something, but they saw two different things. So I've got to believe that the non-human intelligences that are involved with these sightings and with these proposed craft are taking advantage of things that are already in our minds and using those images and portraying those images to us, where the real truth could be something else. In other words, they may be projecting that they look like humanoids when they really look like lobsters, or they're just protoplasm or whatever like that. And the particular sighting that you had mentioned about the two sisters seeing two entirely separate things brought that to mind. But I am really personally interested in the fellows on the helicopter where, and I confused that with the story before, which was about the two teenagers in two different parts of the country, so I apologize for that. But that somebody asked them about their dreams and if they were going out of body, because, as I said, I'm an experiencer. I saw stuff. I got dreams. I felt like I was being pulled out of my body at different times. So that's all really seminal information for me.
What was, it was very interesting to me too, because the government, if they're exploring things like that, they don't let it be known. And they actually called the pilot and asked him, and called several times, what his dreams were, and they wanted to know specific things. And one thing I was interested in was when the object was above their helicopter, the cockpit lit up in green.
Yes.
And I've noticed in other instances where there's green tractor beams, or where there's green events on an airplane or something.
Yes.
And the electronics go haywire and different things like that. And so, and also in the case of the helicopter, it seemed to rise up in the air and nobody knew anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering if there might have just been some type of abduction taking place then, although it would have been quite fast. And that maybe the government thought that or was investigating.
Well, I guess it might have, and the time dimension may have been breached. In other words, they could have been gone out of the helicopter for 45 seconds, but if they were somehow made to remember, and I have very mixed feelings on hypnotic regression, but if somehow that could be done in a careful and very professional way, that we might find out something else. But it's amazing how many people report being pulled out of their body after a UFO sighting, I guess, was my main point to that. Yeah, and in terms of the green light, and also something else you mentioned about a gentleman who was a scientist who began to see a number of UFOs, and I kind of feel a little bit, to a much lesser degree, in that category, because I have seen small green orbs that were fluorescent green on 2 or 3 different occasions. So, and some of them were in the context of a woman that I have known who was involved with ritual rather than UFOs. She was more involved with ritual practices. But there were definitely green orbs in her context in more than one time when I was at 2 different houses which she inhabited. At both times I saw orbs around, one time in the house, one time outside the other house. So the green coloring, it does hit a spot for me because of my own experiences.
Well, there's been a number of cases such as green beams that appear to be tractor beams. Pull somebody in or across. And did you try to take videos or anything of the green orbs?
No, I was a social visitor both times to her home, one of which was near Monroe, New York, the other of which was in Tucson, Arizona. I also experienced green orb that went along during the middle of the night, that went along twice, in fact, once at the place in Arizona at her living quarters there in Tucson, and once in my own apartment in the East Village of Manhattan, I saw a green orbs that went along where you would say the electrical lines were probably underneath the wall. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It was prior to the age of everybody having a cell phone in their back pocket.
Yeah. That a lot of the good sightings, unfortunately, were then.
Yes.
And now with all the electronics, when you do get a cell phone picture or something, you don't know if it's right or faked because it's so easy to fake them.
Yes.
In today's world. Let me see. I was going to say something about a green light.
The tractor beams you were talking about?
Yeah. Well, maybe it'll come to me in a minute.
It does bring to mind something else that happened recently that was more prosaic, if you will. I was up at something called Fire Water, I believe it's called, or River Fire, Water River, something of that nature. Been there a couple of 3 times up in Providence, Rhode Island. It's something that happens around Midsummer Night. They put these fire barges on the water, and people have kind of Renaissance-y costumes on, and they float these fire things up and down the river in Providence, Rhode Island. So I was there this summer, and I visited that, and I looked up in the sky, as is my wont to do, and what do I see in the sky but multicolored lights that were moving in an erratic pattern, stopping and starting, and moving like it seemed to be whoever was in this thing was surveying the firewater demonstration. At what altitude, I couldn't be sure, but I would say at least at the altitude of a low-flying plane, shall we say. And I pointed it out to the people that were accompanying me, along with somebody who was just standing there. And that person said, "Oh, that's got to be a..." help me here, Kate.
Like a helicopter?
No,
or?
not a helicopter. Whatever, a drone. They
Oh.
said that's got to be a drone. Nobody exhibited any interest whatsoever in this thing. I did take a picture or 2 of this, and Irena, they did not come out. Although I was taking pictures of a lot of other things. Now, was it a UFO? Was it a drone? I'd hardly say. I don't know. Could have been either. But the people around me, they were blasé. They said, "Oh, that's a drone," and they couldn't really but you could see the lights, you could see it moving erratically, and they just fluffed it off like par for the course, so to speak.
Well, I think what else can you say, though? That's the whole thing. They're objects, they're flying, they're unidentified. It's a very frustrating field, I'll tell you. I'm quite impressed by your work in that you really followed through on all your... But what was your final conclusion on this?
My final conclusion, unfortunately, I have no idea what UFO phenomena is.
Yeah.
Usually, as a PhD, you study things, and then you know more about them. But I studied UFOs, and I don't know anything about them.
There's no data, there's no consistent data. It's a problem.
Do you feel... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, do you feel like there are fewer sightings now, or like my possible sighting of the drone, that because of the technology, it's getting harder to determine the difference between a UFO and some other modern technology?
I think that might be part of the trouble, and part of the trouble is that it's so easy to fake things that back in the old days, if you had the camera with film and stuff, you couldn't really fake things because they could study them. Today, you know exactly what's going on, and I'm not saying everybody's a faker or anything like that, but it's still very difficult to study photography and things.
What was the latest UFO incident that you have personally studied?
Well, obviously, I'm still working on Roswell, and we announced in the book that we had a possible other new witness.
Yes.
Roswell event. And I guess that's the most current because we're still working on it now and have found out some more things since I published the book. But it was this man that he was a deputy sheriff, and he was traveling with probably a sheriff from Big Springs, Texas to Roswell. And I had the impression they'd never heard of UFOs. And they heard on the police radio that there was a crash. And they found the roads some way and got to the area and saw a craft that was approximately 100 feet in diameter and round. And then they saw 4 bodies, and they were wrapped up, but they could sort of look at them when the wind blew and things. And they said they looked kind of like people, but not a whole lot like people.
Mm-hmm.
They had a lift, and they were lifting them into trucks. And so we put that in the book just for, we weren't saying it was proving anything. We just put it in for, to put it in the public domain because there was a video of the man that saw it that was taken in 1999. He and the other person and the person that made the video and the first people that examined everything are all dead. It came to my publisher, Philip Mantle, and he had the material, and we decided to put in the book. Well, we did find some people that knew him, that vouched for his honesty, and we're still looking at that. So that's new information that we didn't have in the book.
Well, that's going to be interesting to read about. Are you planning another book?
I don't know. I'd like to plan another book maybe, but I don't have definite plans.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. I've dreamed about writing several books. I just have to get around to it. I know what that's about.
So what is your final take on Roswell? Do you think something happened or nothing or maybe not? Or my conclusion on that was something definitely landed there and was taken away by the United States government to Wright Patterson. But what it was is sort of up in the air. And the whole question of bodies, there's a lot of people that really have, the old story, nothing to gain, and sort of has to be forced out of them that they were witnesses, and I think a lot of them were threatened with some nasty things. But you have a lot of information on it. What was your conclusion on Roswell?
Well, I think something did happen,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that gave me pretty firm idea is that they had a recording of a broadcast from Roswell that was made while they were transporting the artifacts to Wright Patterson. And this was just a radio announcer from Roswell, just doing his regular thing. And he stopped right in the middle of the broadcast and said he had called Wright Patterson and the airplane was on its way and about to land or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was pretty concrete evidence that they sent something to Wright Patterson.
Absolutely. I had the great good fortune of having a one-on-one conversation with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, who was actually, as luck would have it, he grew up in Roswell long before not long before, but somewhat before.
No coincidences.
No coincidences, right? But he told me in a small group of people that I was with, he told us that absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he had a conversation with several people from Roswell who knew his father, who knew him, who respected him sort of as the all-American boy who made good and walked on the moon, and that the funeral parlor director told him in no uncertain terms that he made these little coffins. So that's, I respect him more than most people, and I have to go along with that conclusion. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Well, the other thing too is I was at a conference and someone stood up with Mitchell and said, "All right, Ed, we're just a bunch of UFO nuts here. No one's going to listen to anything that goes on here. So please give us a straight story." And he looked right at the fellow and said, "They're here." And so again, he was the type of man that you really believed for whatever reason.
Well, the other thing that happened about him was that he gave a lecture in downtown Manhattan on 28th Street or something back a few years before he passed on. And the invited guests to this lecture, beyond people who were ufologists and so forth, were the graduating class of Aviation High School in Garden City, Queens, Long Island. And he told them that they had better, up their game to the point where they realized that in the future, when they were 40 years old and working on avionics of some sort, that this was going to be something that they were going to have to deal with. And that, yes, in fact, that they were here. So I agree with Kate on that. So in terms of what's your opinion on recent UFOs, besides the fact that you can't really tell if a photograph has been doctored too easily?
Well, there seem to be actually more reports now than there had been in the past, but there's more people and more objects that you could see and not identify, and people also have more cameras. So, and also a big difference is the internet, so that people used to just have like groups, and you would contact the group, and there's a whole lot of groups because this is sort of an off topic. But now there's the internet, and anybody can say anything on the internet. So there's a lot more, and it's a lot more possible to report things too.
Now you have looked at photographs professionally in your career at the DIA and also when you were with Battelle, I assume. And today we have digital photographs, and the digital photographs, when photographing an anomalous object, often they seem to give off a signature wave pattern that's around the UFO, we'll call it, and that concludes some people to believe that the photograph was doctored, but it leads other people to conclude that there is some form of maybe a heat pattern or something of a cosmic wave pattern, I don't know, coming off the object. Can you speak to that a little?
I think it's possible. I had worked for Popular Mechanics, writing articles, and one thing I wrote about was how the process they were using to develop stealth. And I went to a stealth lab and watched how they very carefully tested materials for the outside of a plane so that it would reflect radar, and how they tested the shape of the plane and things like that. And so now they have stealth that we have, and it's possible that the objects have been employing stealth for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have, some surface or some kind of electronics around the surface or anything else that might interfere with radar or just the shape and that sort of thing.
So have you ever seen one yourself?
I don't know. I saw something once, but I didn't. Have you ever heard of Marfa, Texas?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
The Marfa lights?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Well, I've been there a number of times because I have friends that live around there and have looked at them. But anyway, in Marfa, there's these repeating lights, and they've been seen ever since the 1800s. They don't repeat in a regular pattern, but people see lights, and usually in the mountains south of Marfa. And Marfa even put in a big, expensive viewing area for people to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I've been at the viewing area, and I've seen lights, but I thought they were just cars on trails in the mountains, and it didn't really impress me. But my friends lived in a house that was north of Marfa, quite a ways north, about 20 miles, but it was on a high mountain. Actually, it was on top of an extinct volcano, which is interesting. But they had a patio that overlooked where you could see off in the distance and see Marfa, and a porch and a big picture window. So I saw a lot of Marfa while I was there, and I've been there several times. And one night, very late at night, like about 11:30, I saw this big light over Marfa. And I thought, well, that's not going to stay there very long. There's not a whole lot of planes. It was sort of a deserted area. But I ran for my camcorder and got it and come back, and it was still there. And
Wow.
so I recorded for a while. I was really tired, and I finally just quit because I was going to sleep. But it was a big light over Marfa. And I called the airport, and they said they hadn't seen anything. But it's a local airport where they close at like 5:30 and everybody goes home. So I never knew. I didn't really report it, but I did film it.
Well, that's very interesting, and I read that account in your book, and you also, I believe, mentioned a place in New Hampshire that also had a similar place where people viewed such lights, and I know there's also one. I don't know if it's in North Carolina or Virginia that occurs as well, but I'd be very interested in finding more information about the New Hampshire one, because I'm more than likely to be in New Hampshire more often than Marfa, for sure. But what about the criticism of Marfa lights in general? Not a criticism, but alternate explanation that it's like some form of piezoelectric or magnetic anomaly in the earth that's caused by quartz crystals in the ground, yada yada. I don't know if I have that quite right,
Well,
but
especially if there's an extinct volcano in the area,
Yeah.
it would have produced that.
what do you say to that? Is that a possibility in your mind or not?
I don't know, because I never studied the. They have earthquake lights.
Yes.
People seem to be pretty definite, but I don't think there were any earthquakes, and I didn't really study the geology to even have an idea. Where I was a group of extinct volcanoes, and I was on a volcano that it was extinct for a long time, but it sure looked like a volcano.
Indeed. Uh-huh.
Really?
At the-
I didn't even know that there were extinct volcanoes in Texas, did you?
I knew that there are extinct volcanoes in the Southwest because I've seen some of them.
Huh.
I didn't, I haven't explored Texas as fully as I probably should have at this point in my life. But
That's interesting.
yes. So, aside from Roswell,
Mhm.
what is your? There you go, Kate. Aside from Roswell, what is your favorite? Your most. By favorite, I mean the most compelling case that you could mention.
Well, the most compelling to me, have you ever heard of Hartley Rutledge?
No, that's a new one on me.
He was a physics professor and head of the department.
Is he the guy who had all the UFO experiences that I referenced before?
Yes.
Okay, so I did. I remember. I recall reading about him in the book. Yes. So go forward with that. I'm sorry to interrupt. Really.
Well, he was a physicist with training in physics and head of the department and everything else. And people were telling him about UFO sightings in Missouri, which is where he lived. And he was a skeptic. And so he decided to go out with instruments and people and explore. And so he did. And he was going to prove them wrong in 2 weeks and get back to business. Well, he went out, and for the rest of his life, he was studying them.
Oh boy.
Sucked in.
He made one of the best studies ever, though, because he did it in a scientific way of, like, I've been in biology, and if you want to study animals, you do field studies, and you may go out, see what time of day they come out, and when they go back in their burrows and things. Well, he set it up sort of like that with field stations and all kinds of equipment, photographic equipment, and magnetometers and everything you could think of so that they could watch if a UFO came. And they had ways of telling UFOs, of guessing which were UFOs and which weren't. It was during a flap, or when there were a whole lot of sightings. And so that they actually did studies real time on UFOs, which I don't think anybody really has ever done because they're unpredictable. But there were a lot happening then. And they got recordings of kind of interaction of UFOs, such as when they would come to a station, they might go around it instead of right past it. He said that when they tried to take pictures of UFOs, that it wasn't like taking a picture of a tree or something, that the pictures didn't turn out like what they expected at all sometimes, and it was as if the UFOs could kind of control their cameras. And he wrote a book, Project Identification, but this was real-time study done by a physicist and other scientists using scientific method and that sort of thing. So I think it was a real good study, and pretty well showed something's going on. But it also explained things. There seemed to be some kind of mental interaction where the UFO would disguise itself as a star or something, and that sort of thing. But it also kind of explained why there's not a lot of pictures of UFOs.
Yes, indeed. Well, that brings me to some stuff that has happened both on this show and the Kate Valentine UFO show, which our co-host here, Kate Valentine, hosted prior to the Shattered Reality podcast, which we're now broadcasting. And that is that inexplicably, we have had things cut in and out, and on the Kate Valentine UFO show, where at that moment I was a guest along with another now deceased woman who was also a UFO experiencer. She was interviewing the both of us, and there was two engineers, not just our friend Mr. Bill, but another engineer was on the scene as well, and made 3 copies, if I'm right. Is that right? Yep.
Yes.
Made 3 copies of the show, and it completely disappeared from a professional radio station recording studio. And then we had a MUFON investigator on the Chase Kletsky.
Oh,
we had
okay.
a
Oh,
MUFON
right.
investigator on, and it was like one of the
great
shows
interview.
prior to the 20th show. I don't remember what the number would have been, and we, read her accounts, and we were really excited to speak with her. And again, the entire broadcast disappeared. In addition, we've had other anomalous things happen, which makes you think either is the government doing something? I don't know. We're very small potatoes in terms of that. Or is it this kind of a telepathic issues with UFO studies, and how, like at the Sherman Skinwalker Ranch, the cameras go defunct. Even when another camera is watching them, they short out and stuff with no reason whatsoever, and the wires are cut even while cameras are watching, and no one's there to cut the wires. It's like really baffling stuff.
Yeah, I remember that, reading that. And Harley Rutledge, he said he got so he could identify UFOs, and I mean, airplanes have lights and sounds and things, and he could distinguish airplanes from them. And he saw quite a few, and he was a trained scientist. So when they say scientists don't believe in UFOs or they don't see them, well, they do. And he admitted it. He got harassed, but he still stood up for himself and admitted it.
Yeah.
I think the astronomer Clyde Tombaugh who was the discoverer of the planet Pluto. I believe that he saw. I mean, I think he was an experiencer of seeing UFOs, was he not?
Yes, he was. I think he saw more than one, too, or reported more than one.
Well, he was
Yeah.
out in the dark, so yeah.
Uh,
I think another reason for drop-in sightings is that the sky is so light these days. Have you noticed it with in the large
Pollution.
cities?
Yeah, light pollution. Yes, indeed.
And people don't look up anymore because there's nothing to see.
Oh,
So
they're staring down at their cell phones.
yeah, well, yeah, that too. Yeah, but then again, but that's good too because if they do see something, it's instant communication too. I guess.
Well, I tried to take a picture of the thing up in Providence, and all I got was like a smear of light, and none of my other pictures of the fire water and everything else turned out. They all turned out well, so it's a mystery.
So, and it's a mystery that's driving us all nuts. Do you think we'll ever really know just what these things are?
I have no idea.
I'm telling you, it is just driving me crazy. It's been for, way over 50 years I've been looking at this stuff, and just nothing that you can put together. My son always kids me. He said, he's going to be rounding the hall in some hospital somewhere and go, Mom, they landed, and I'm going to go,
Let's hope not, Kate.
yeah, I mean, what can be... What's the point of keeping it secret? I mean, yeah, I know, it's going to panic the general population,
Well,
yada, yada, yada. But, I mean, really, what is the point? Is it just that knowledge is power and they're keeping all the knowledge to themselves? I don't get, I mean, come on, just let us know, please.
I think there's a couple of things going on, Kate. I mean, in terms of everybody panicking, there's the idea that there's 8 billion people on the face of the earth, and maybe only one in 100 or one in 1,000 would panic, but that's a hell of a lot of people. That's one thing. And the other thing that's more personal to me, I think that some people who have been contacted, their brains get fried from it.
Well, that was the point, Dr. Scott, toward the end of your conclusion, saying that perhaps it is not nuts and bolts, but that it's something that's going to lead to an evolution in humanity. And I think you were leading toward that line. Am I correct?
Yeah, after investigating and talking to people and things, it's like the two sisters. One saw one thing and one saw another. And I've had a number of examples of that. And I also have examples of things merging and coming apart and things like that in reports I've received from people. And so I can't really picture, I think UFO phenomena includes all kinds of things. But I think one thing it includes is something that we just don't understand. That's not like a craft, that's more like some form of interaction or intelligence, but that it's not like us at all.
Right. Well, no, if they're aliens, and they're not us, so they wouldn't be like us. But but that whole mental state was that was interesting. It's a whole different approach. Myself, I just like nuts and bolts. I really hope it's something, once you get past nuts and bolts, it's something, can the average human really
Conceptualize it.
Yeah, really. I mean...
Well, even if you think of something coming from, let's say for some reason, it's from a different star system that's 300 light years away, which isn't that far away in terms of the universe. But let's say it was somebody from 300 light years away. What would happen then is it's not likely they'd be coming in a chemical rocket ship. And so they may take some sort of a wormhole. The physics I'm not good at. I mean, most people are not there on physics to be able to explain it, but there must be an alternate way for them to come here. And therefore, it could be using something that's some type of interstellar drive that we're not aware of, and that they come in as ephemeral objects and do all kinds of strange things physically that we're not able to
Well, yeah, I mean, Columbus couldn't visualize a jet going across the ocean in a few hours, after he was struggling through with 3 dinky little fishing boats.
I don't think these things are mutually exclusive, and as we had stated at the beginning of the show, that these things could be more than one thing, right, Irena?
Yes, and you were talking about the green
Orbs.
orbs. Well, they're a form of UFO too, and if they're like little orbs, they're called orbs. If they're big things, they might be called UFOs.
Right.
They don't seem to be physical like us. They seem to be more like, we're molecular, and they don't impress me as being molecular like us, but they're still belong to the UFO phenomenon and can behave in intelligent ways.
Their energy, it seems like they're like some form of energy. Yeah. So, go ahead.
I think that's part of it too. So I think it's a very complex mixture, but I don't think it's all craft.
Yes, it's going to be a mystery. Do you have anything that we're coming towards a close here, having been with you for about an hour now? So do you have anything you'd like to say? You should give us, once again, the title of the book. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it on Amazon. Give us, once again, the title of the book, because we really recommend this book highly, and we're particularly impressed with you because women have a hard time in the UFO field as well as in astronomy and in other fields, and they still have a hard time in the UFO field. So lay it on us, Irena.
Congratulations to you two.
Thank you.
It's UFOs Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation and Government Cover-Up. And if you just put Irena Scott, Irena Scott, in the on the internet under Google or something, you should be able to find it and be able to order it right then. I have a webpage called irenascott.com, and it tells how to order it. I'm on Facebook, and it's where we're selling it is Amazon.com.
And so if people do have sightings or wanted to get in touch with you, they could get in touch with you through your Facebook as well?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think it belongs to Facebook. I think you can send a message to somebody that's not on Facebook.
Yes, well, that's Messenger there. They've got Messenger there for Facebook for that purpose, direct messages and so forth. So before we say goodbye, anything you want to add to what we've talked about? We'd love to hear it.
Well, I think it's very, very, very complicated, and that part of it's probably something that we don't understand very well, but it may have something to do with quantum mechanics and that type of new physics that we're just now learning about.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank you so much for being with us today, really, and for taking the time. I so appreciate it. And
It's an honor
It's
that
been
you've come
wonderful
on the show.
speaking to you.
Yeah,
really.
it's really an honor, a person of science such as yourself, and we really applaud you. So thanks so much, Dr. Irena Scott.
Yeah. And good luck with your studies. If you find something definitive, give us a call.
Yeah, well, give us a call anyway. We're always happy to hear from you.
We'll probably read about you first, though, right?
I suppose. Thanks again. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye, and thank you.
And we, of course, would like to thank Dr. Irena Scott for being with us. But now, Mr. Anthony Santuoso, who is a well-known figurative artist in the Magic Realism School of Painting, really somebody whose artwork you should get to know. And could you mention your website, Anthony?
Well, there's no website. It's just a blog. You just type in my name, anthonysantuoso.blogspot.com, and you'll see a bunch of
Okay.
pictures.
Do you want to spell Santuoso? Because not everybody knows how to spell it.
Well, Anthony spelled Anthony, And Santuoso is spelled Santuoso.
Well, I've seen some of these paintings, and they're truly glorious, and they do.
Well, I'm glad you like them. You know, if you just Google my name, it'll come up. You don't need anything but Anthony Santuoso.
And they do cover some sort of mystical aspects in them. There are mystical concepts and dream pictures as well. So I'm mentioning this because these are areas that we cover here on Shattered Reality Podcast. And if I recall correctly, you have two stories to tell us. One concerns a deceased uncle and deceased cousin of yours, and what happened to them along the Jersey Shore. So if you would like to start out with that one, Anthony, we would really appreciate that.
Well, I'd be happy to tell you. I had an uncle who was not all that much older than me, and my cousin who was my age, and they liked to go fishing, is what they like to do, and they'd go down to the Jersey Shore, and they'd fish at night for striped bass, actually. And they'd stand on the jetties, the rocks going down to the ocean, sometimes till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So they were out there one night. They had a fire going too, and my uncle was out on the jetty, and he claimed this. He told me the story over a Christmas dinner conversation. He claimed that, what he described as a flying saucer, just a kind of bright spinning orb, sort of came down above him and my cousin Randy. My uncle's name is Eddie. Randy ran away in fear, and Uncle Eddie claims he called out to them to make contact, and then they sort of disappeared. So anyway, it was just a funny story. And I said to my uncle, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Go ask Randy. He's in the other room," which we had 2 rooms people were eating in. So I went in the other room and I said, "Randy, would you please tell me the story about the jetties and the flying saucer with Uncle Eddie?" And my cousin said, "I don't want to talk about it." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "I just don't want to talk about it. Don't ask me." So he never would speak about it, and Uncle Eddie always claimed that this is something that happened.
And where was this exactly, Anthony?
Long Branch, New Jersey, on the jetties. And it was the summertime, and that was the story, and I can never get any further into it because they wouldn't give me any more information, but he's scared my cousin, and my uncle claims it's absolutely true. So I thought it was kind of an interesting story. That's why I happened to mention it.
Well, I can verify the story because I knew your Uncle Eddie, and he told me as well. So I can verify that he told me basically the same story, and that he ran out there and he was ready for them to whoop him up, but they didn't.
You sure?
Yes.
No missing time?
Well, I don't know. I can't say if he had missing time.
Well, he had a lot of missing time. I can tell you that. But no, he wouldn't make up fake stories. It's not like him to do that. He had an experience, and he described it as best he could, and it was a fairly typical story about lights in the sky and the size of the thing, the scale of it, and it frightened him. But Randy ran away. But that was the extent of that story. And like I said, I could never get any further into it because Randy wouldn't verify it. They did coincidentally both die about 20 years after or actually 30 years after the event. One of cancer, one of kind of a lupus problem. So I don't know what the effect was, but they did both die, and relatively young too. Eddie was 67, and Randy was only in his 40s, I think.
That's sad.
So,
yes, it is unfortunate, an unfortunate synchronicity, as we would say. That, and if I recall correctly, although you had said that your cousin Randy had died of a lupus-related condition, he also suffered from cancer, did he not?
Yeah, he had all kinds of problems. He developed many problems. He had some kind of skin cancer. He had lupus. He was infested with different health problems for the major part of his adult life, it seems.
Well, we mourn their loss, and we apologize for bringing that part of the story up. The second part has to do with your father.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yes, my father had one of those experiences where he he died for a minute or two, maybe. I don't know how long you can die for, but they brought him back to life. He was in a hospital, actually. They were working on him. He had heart trouble, and his heart stopped. And I guess he straight-lined, and he suddenly saw himself from above looking down at the table and wondered why everybody was running around and seemed so agitated he couldn't figure out what it was. But he felt inclined to turn away from the whole thing, which he did, and then he was attracted to some kind of a source of light, which he then followed or pursued, and found himself in a channel or tunnels or bridges of some sort, and going around and finding all kinds of people he used to know, including his, the people that had passed away, his mother and his father and his sister. And basically the interesting thing about that story was that it was a very happy event. He felt very good. It's like he said, he only figured out he had this experience because we were watching something on TV one night many years ago. I think it was called That's Incredible. And people were telling stories which are similar to his. So he said, I had that experience. And I confessed to him that his heart did stop. And they brought him back to life. And like I said, the most interesting thing about it for me, at any rate, was that it was a very happy experience. It actually transformed him for a few years. He had a smile on his face, which is not typical of him. And, it seemed like he lost a certain fear of death as a consequence.
Well, that's a biggie, wouldn't you say?
I guess that's a big deal, yes, it is.
The interesting thing that you mentioned, but I don't think was really accentuated in your dialogue here, is that he didn't realize when this occurred that he had, in fact, his heart had stopped, and it met one of the clinical ideas of death. That's one clinical, right, Kate?
Yeah, no, he had no idea. We never told him. They never told him. He had no idea. He just had this experience when his heart did stop, and then was reminded of it because of this television show, basically, and then he recalled very clearly that he had a very similar experience, and he went ahead and tried to tell me about it. As a matter of fact, I'm making a painting now which kind of relates to it.
Really?
I'm trying to make a kind of afterlife painting of kind of pleasurable journey, a wonderful experience. It's like a joyful thing. It's like a joyful death picture, if you want to call it that, because death is a major issue, and when you can somehow come to make friends with it and make a realization of what it actually is, I think it transforms your whole life. And his certainly was. It didn't. I have to admit, it didn't stick. After a few years, he went back being a grumpy old man. But I still think he wasn't any. I think he was fundamentally transformed. Not so much afraid of death anymore. I think he was at that point afraid of life and all the things
like many of us today.
All the things that it kept. That was necessary to keep him alive. But he was transformed by the experiance.
In regard to this picture that you've been painting, I would like to invite you to mail us a JPEG, a photo on the internet, so we can place it on this on both of our websites and use it in our YouTube when we put this session up on YouTube. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to either of these stories, Anthony?
Only that I know there's more than meets the eyes, and it takes a kind of special attitude to see the whole picture, and sort of letting go of judgments and sarcasm and cynicism, and really just letting the world tell you its story. And sometimes that comes through other people and their experiences, which I think is what I just tried to tell you about.
Yes. Well, certainly. Yeah. If you know of any other listeners to Shattered Reality, or just other people who would like to express their experience on Shattered Reality Podcast, I really hope you'll let us know. And Kate, you want to say goodbye to Anthony? You want to make some comments?
Yes, I would like to say goodbye to Anthony, but basically, I think it's great that you came on and shared that experience, because people like to hear this. And it happens to people, and then they think, wow, maybe I'm a little bit off on this. But when other people have had the same thing, it makes them feel much more confident that, yeah, I did experience it. It was good. And so it's great that you shared this. I think it'll help a lot of people out there.
Yeah, I bet you. I imagine before he was reminded of it, I bet you he thought it was just a kind of dream of some sort, which is very much what it all seems like anyway. But then, seeing other people having, like you said, other people having a similar experience, he realized that he had this experience.
Well, people who have had the experience and do talk about it, when asked if it was like a dream, they say often that it was more real than waking reality. So I've not had a near-death experience, knock on wood, which is my wooden head, but that's what I hear from the experiences of that.
Well, it was very real to my father. I can tell you that it was a very real experience. That's what was so nice about it. It wasn't just some kind of hazy, foggy wonder what's going on kind of thing. It was more like going in a place and meeting up with people you haven't seen for a long time. And I mean, we all have dreams like that where you meet somebody who's passed away and you hug them or something. And it was very, very clear. The way he put it. It was very, very concrete experience. Yes, it wasn't ephemeral. It was a very clear experience.
Well, again, thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it.
Yes, I do too. We really appreciate it, and we will put your painting on both of our websites. And one of Anthony's paintings can be seen on my blog, one of my blog posts. I have used it in terms of, it's a dream painting that you made. So we're all out there rooting for Anthony to sell lots of his wonderful magical realism paintings. Thanks, Anthony. And
sure. Even if you don't buy them, take a look.
All right.
They're up there for your entertainment.
All right, Anthony.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye
sure
now.
Enough. Bye. Thanks.
Wow, Kate. I think we had really a big show today that was very good in both regards, don't you think?
Absolutely.
And this is big number 55.
All right.
Our next show is going to be a researcher named David Bucher, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And he has written about one particular case. He's a researcher, and he has gone into great depths about a case which seems to indicate an abduction. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that right now, but that's purportedly our next podcast, and we hope it does work out as we plan.
But if anyone's listening that have had abduction experiences, please put them on our website. Or you don't have to use your name, but we'd love to hear from you. That's something that, Fahrusha goes through a tremendous amount of time and effort to get these podcasts together, and sometimes it's nice to know that somebody's out there listening.
Indeed,
We'd appreciate it. And also our guests are uniformly excellent and have really interesting things to say, and we hope that it's not just out there in the void somewhere. So we'd really like to hear from you. And since it is abduction time next episode, we'd really, if you've had some, and I know there's experiences out there, so pop them on the website.
Or send us a message and we'll get in touch with you. All righty now.
Or we'll send someone to get in touch.
Yeah. One of the men in black, maybe, or in this case, the women in black.
Yeah, it's a ticket. Okay.
All right. So let's say goodbye.
Okay, adios.
From Shattered Reality.